My guest today is the writer of medievalist.net. Please welcome Peter Konieczny, and today we're going to discuss the Mongol Conquest of Baghdad. And before we start, I always ask, how did you come across writing for medievalist.net? What is
Oh,
medievalist.net?
thanks for having me. Like medievalist.net's been around since 2008. And I've been, I co-founded it. I'm the owner, editor, and basically we are trying to offer everything that's interesting about the Middle Ages to the wider world. So, that could be what's happening in the medieval academic world to what's on movies and video games. Yeah, and we have a bunch of writers on our staff, and we also have a few podcasts going. So
Hmm.
uh, yeah, so we have a lot of fun here.
I can see that. And let's talk. What is it about the Mongol Conquest of Baghdad that fascinated you before we go into that part?
Yeah, it's been kind of a pet project for me for about 20 years, to be honest. And I really actually got interested in it when the US invasion of Iraq happened. So
Mm.
way back then, and there was articles then talking about, well, this is the first invasion of Baghdad, first time Baghdad's been conquered since the Mongols did it in 1258. And you kind of read like, oh, the city was completely destroyed then, and there was kind of comparisons, and I was kind of like, just as a historian, just kind of intrigued by like, all right, what happened, like, what, take a look. So I've been pretty busy over the years with my things, but I
Mm.
kind of slowly been looking at the kind of research and the kind of sources on it, and it's a very fascinating episode, so
Mm.
I really enjoy talking about it.
The Abbasids, to be honest, we are going to have an episode on Islamic Spain and Andalus later on this year. I've been looking forward to that one. But it seemed to Abbasids are fascinating to me because while Al Andalus seemed to have a golden age of literacy, and the Abbasids seem to have a golden age of science, and that's what's really intriguing to me about the Abbasids. And we will take a look at the fall of the Abbasids today, but I just want to mention it's that to me, the interesting part about the Abbasids is the science part and the House of Wisdom itself, which we, of course, will get back to during the Mongol Conquest. But that's really intriguing to me, and I love this kind of history.
Oh yeah, the Abbasids are again a wonderful kind of society to look at, and Baghdad, it comes founded in the 8th century. Immediately
It
explodes into
really has a
becoming.
unique art. And like, while you can't see it today, I'm sorry for interrupting you there, but while you can't see it today, it really has a unique architecture. But by being a round city, I think it's really unique for medieval times as well.
Yeah, like the idea, like this is a completely planned city at the beginning. It's constructed really out of nothing. And within a couple generations, this vying to be one of the largest cities of the world, and the most, probably the richest as well.
Mm.
So it was great. It's a lot of stories can be said about that. Like by the
Mm.
time we get to the 13th century, a lot of history has taken place, and Baghdad is not the city it once was, but it's still, the Abbasids are still ruling in that
Mm.
city, and it is one of the longest dynasties of the Middle Ages.
Mm. So let's talk about the last, I believe he's the last caliph for I'm going to try to say his name right here, Al Mustasim Billah. And how does he don't come to power? How does he rule? What is he one of the causes for the Mongol conquests at the time that makes them
Uh,
succeed?
well, he's not quite like a cause, but he's not a help either. Like he's kind of brought in. He's the son of the previous caliph, but in that era, being the son, or even the eldest son, doesn't guarantee you
Mm.
succession. So he was actually kind of chosen as, because he was a bit more compliant, and there were already, when he kind of gets chosen in the 1240s, there was already the big concern was the Mongols attacking, and he was seen as a person to be would will work better with the Mongols.
We talked
Uh,
about this in the last episode about the two-parter on the Ottoman Empire, and
Mhm.
there it was quite common up until I believe the 19th century to kill their brothers. Was this the cross in the Abbasids as well?
Oh no, they didn't kill each other. But like usually they wind up just living good lives and stuff like that. So there's actually always quite a lot of like Abbasids running around, which even the it's the reason why they actually persevere after the Mongol conquest. Um, but no, like he's kind of brought in, kind of chosen by the politics, and even back then, like being the ruler is doesn't give you full power. There's quite a lot of bureaucracy in the Baghdad and the Caliphate. So he has to kind of deal with kind of various factions. He's got a vizier, Ibn al-Hakami, who's a Shiite, and that causes certain religious tensions because of Sunni Shiite issues that come up from time to time in
Mm.
Baghdad. He's got other like officials that have semi importance, so that you can't just do away with them. So, and these guys neighbors that where like the Abbasids uh don't have a lot of political power, but they do have a lot of moral suasion, right?
Mhm.
Like um they see themselves as a kind of like the leader of the Islamic world. In some ways
Mm.
they are like a religious leader, but
They
you
do
know
still have a hold on Mecca Medina. The Fatimids doesn't have
oh
Mecca
oh
Medina, do they?
no, but neither would the Abbasids. By this time, like it's under a Umayyad control, like and even not even that, it's under Mamluk control. And these kind of other kingdoms kind of pay a little lip service, but like they don't send money to the Abbasids or anything like that. It's very much like it's nice to have the support of the Abbasids, but it's not necessary.
Mm. So, what was the state in general of the Abbasids? What it was a former shell of what it used to be, right? But was it
Yeah,
still kind of decent empire caliphate at this point?
well, the Caliphate, like the what you say of the Abbasid rule would have been, Baghdad, the areas around it, and going down to say Basra. So they kind of like think of Iraq, like the southern 2/3 of Iraq, because they don't even control Mosul. Like there's an emir in Mosul who's kind of a semi-ally with the Abbasids. But as I kind of tell, he doesn't actually come to their aid when it comes for the actual siege. Quite the opposite. But they still, Baghdad's still a large city. It's still fairly wealthy. But everyone kind of recognizes it still has better day. It's had better days, but apparently they have quite a thriving music scene in Baghdad at the time. So
Hmm. Let's talk about something that fascinates me in quite a lot, and that is, of course, the House of Wisdom. Well, because that would be as we talked about, the Abbasids did have a golden age of science, but was it still going strong, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad? Let's briefly explain what was the House of Wisdom to those who may not be aware.
yeah, like back in the early 9th century, when the caliphs decided to kind of create like basically a library and slash institution to support scholarship, right? And that could be translations of ancient writings. It could be scientific works. Astronomy was a huge thing, medicine, things like that. And during the heyday of Baghdad, it was literally well known for a
Hmm.
lot of scientific advancements and a lot of great research, wonderful stuff.
I
um
believe a lot of the science we have today is thanks to the contribution of the Abbasid House of Wisdom, right? Isn't that's the
Oh yeah,
case?
yeah, like the episodes and the succession, because a lot of this, like the Fatimids set up their own house of wisdom. You know, any kind of ruler in the Arabic world to beef up their credentials would often like hire scholars. They'd be interested in that. Especially you want like physicians, things like that. So like even say 13th century, there's lots and lots of people writing about works doing this or that. It's much more spread out. But like Baghdad's still, center of like lots of people that do learning. As I said, music was quite a big deal in Baghdad around that time, with like people writing a lot of scholarship on the topic.
So it was still kind of a golden age in Baghdad, while the Caliphate was more or less falling apart. You would say.
Yeah, like it's still going. Like these institutions can carry on. It's you know uh, the issue is like often people get paid better elsewhere. So you find like a lot of scholars, they tend to move around from Persia, Iran, into like Damascus, into Egypt. People look for their best jobs, and at that time, say Baghdad was still doing well, but it was still in competition with other places. But like I have a sense that like the Abbasid government is kind of coming along, but it's not something it doesn't have a lot of military strength to kind of back it up. It just doesn't have the money. So
But is Al-Musta Sinbila, sorry if I say his name wrong here, but does it recognize that the empire is falling apart? Is it trying to do something about it, or is it just trying to kind of keep what he has for
yeah,
the moment?
I think he's just kind of trying to keep what he has. Like he does get a bad rap, I think, through history. Like there's kind of a lot of tales, kind of him being, uh, you know, wanting to keep his money, doesn't want to pay for armies and stuff like that. But it's hard to tell. Like we don't know that much about him. He doesn't. Like he's running he is the caliph for about like 16 years before the Baghdad kind of gets defeated. So it's not a particularly bad time to be living in Baghdad, but at the same time, the forces of history are coming down on him.
So let's talk about the other side, the Mongol expansion. How is the Mongol expansion going at the time? Because they are getting closer and closer to
Mm.
Baghdad, aren't they?
Yeah. So like the Mongols kind of first kind of enter into the Middle East when they come with the war with the Khwarazmian Empire, and that's basically an empire that was in what today's kind of Central Asia. Um, they go to war with Genghis Khan goes to war with them in 1219, 1221. They're basically defeated and routed. The remnants kind of flee into the Middle East, and the Mongols, they do send like forces into them, and like one kind of army is kind of moves into what is now kind of Azerbaijan, so just around the South Caspian Sea, and they kind of set up this kind of like a mini estate there to take kind of control. So by the 1240s, there's a guy named Beju Noyan, and he's the kind of leader of this Mongol force, and he's actually done a fairly good job where he's been able to defeat the Seljuk Turks, the Armenians, the Georgians. Even taken like liege of Mosul, and even the Crusaders at Antioch, the Principality of Antioch, swears allegiance to the Mongols through Beju. So he's able to kind of get like allies is not the right word. Underlings would be that he's kind of is setting up, and there are movements against the Abbasid Caliphate, like little kind of military incursions, kind of testing out the waters. But Beju never thinks he's able to uh, defeat the Baghdad, so he never launches an invasion against him. But he's always there.
Are they right on the borders of the
Yeah,
Abbasids at this point?
yeah. Think of if you can kind of imagine where Azerbaijan is, like that's an area of very good fields, so that's where the Mongols will keep their horses, and like all the areas around him are basically have Mongol overlordship around him, and they're able to use those armies. So they have quite a area presence for quite a long time. So everyone knew that the Mongols were around, and it was just it was always kind of a fear that like one day the Mongols would come in force, and that's what that happens in the 1250s.
we discussed in the last episode of our second part on the Ottoman Empire that about this Ottoman-Swedish alliance in the 1700s, and it was kind of like enemies of my enemy is my friend. And was this a chance? Did the Byzantines and the Abbasids kind of realize that this could be a force to be reckoned with? Did they kind of discuss having an alliance against the Mongols, or did that, like we said, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, or did they just kind of hope that the other one would be taken? And
I think there was always talk of people like, let's do an alliance. Like there's even um the Somalis apparently sent an envoy out to Western Europe to see if they could bring up an alliance between various Islamic states and Crusader and Christians against this Mongol threat. He was kind of laughed at, of course, by like kind of Western European leaders, only to have them, Europe being invaded by the Mongols soon after in the 1240s. But
they're not laughing now.
No. It's like, yeah, there was sort of quite a fear. But it's hard, for various kind of states to make alliances. Like, like the Abbasids had hoped that, like, the rulers of Damascus and Aleppo and even Egypt would come to their aid. Those plans turned for nothing. But meanwhile, there's lots of other kind of states that have decided to, work with the Mongols. And when I say work, I mean like, pay allegiance to the Mongols, pay their taxes, and ultimately send troops to the Mongols. And you see quite a lot of that, like to the east, like where's Iran now today, where a lot of people are kind of, saying that, let's work with the Mongols, let's help them out, and they can get rid of our enemies. And that really leads into when the Mongol invasion starts, first against the Ismailis in what is today the mountains of Iran.
Let's talk about it a little bit. What if here? Let's say there was an alliance between the Abbasids and the Byzantines. So even though likely as it sounds, would their joint forces have been able? Even Byzantines at this point is after the Fourth Crusade, of course, is a former shell of itself as well. But would the joint force with the Byzantines and the Abbasids have been able to defeat the Mongols, or would they have been defeated regardless?
No, yeah, no, I don't think so. Like, you often have like a lot of these states are fairly weak in themselves, like, and even like alliances are really tough to maintain, right? Like it's like it's just the kind of the nature of politics. Like, like your nearby enemy, like you're always kind of hoping that they're going to be, defeated. And at first you might think that like the Mongols will be somehow in help. Like there was like early, like when the Mongols first kind of appear on the scene, even the Crusaders, when they kind of learn about them, they think that they're going to help them. Like they literally thought like these were kind of Christians in some way that were going to help them defeat, conquer Baghdad, help them retake Jerusalem. And it's, only as once they start establishing contacts that they realize that Mongols really just wanted everyone to surrender to them and take over the world. So they don't, they they have trouble kind of forming alliances, and that's just the nature of the medieval world. Is it's hard to come to support of a previous enemy. So.
I mean, even alliances in that time were broken left and right. Right. They didn't last very long.
Exactly, and like once you can accept that the Mongols can rule over you, there are benefits to that. So sometimes it's better to ally or work with the biggest.
If you surrendered, yes, that would be a benefit. But if you didn't, that would be devastating. If you didn't surrender to the Mongols, though.
Exactly, and that's what really happens with the two kind of forces that really decide to fight out the Mongols, which are the Ismailis, which are like those are the ones that we call like the assassins, right?
They're kind of the real Assassin's Creed, in a sense. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those are people.
mm.
So
But yeah, let's talk about the Mongol army. What was the Mongol army like? What made them so powerful as they were this unbeatable force to be reckoned with,
yeah,
for the lack of a better word?
yeah, they're based on the kind of the Great Steppe, which is this flat plains lands that extend from kind of present day Hungary all the way across Siberia to like northern China. And these are like ideal grazing lands, and for like eons they were home to countless kind of peoples that had like a lot of warrior ability, good, very strong cavalry. Um, the what happens is there's a big unification under Chinggis Khan at the early 13th century, where he's able to kind of set this up, and he's able to start picking off his neighbors, um, and moreover incorporating them into his armies. So you have uh, forces like where you have peoples from different areas kind of serving with the Mongols, including, as we'll see in Baghdad, you have like Chinese engineers working there as part of the army. So the Mongol Empire just grows quite a bit as they kind of conquer areas. They conquer what's present day Russia and Ukraine. They go into Poland, into Hungary. Um, they are in South. They're even like up against the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines are very good at recognizing that their overlordship too, to a certain degree. But yeah, and they have this quite massive army, and then it's kind of decided around the year 1253 to we're going to have this large campaign to take over the Middle East. And like the idea was we're going to take everything from all the way up to Cairo, up to the Nile River. That was the plan. And it's the Mongol Khan at the time, Mongay, selects one his brother Hulego to
Mm.
lead this force, and he grants him 2 out of every 10 soldiers in the Mongol Empire to do it.
Did they have any? Because again, I would refer to an old episode of that, not the old 2 episodes that we did, part one of the Ottoman Empire, and we talked about the siege of Bursa, which took like 8-9 years, and they didn't have the proper siege because they didn't have the proper siege equipment. Did they have this kind of siege equipment necessary to take Baghdad, or wasn't that necessary for the
Oh no,
Mongols?
they actually had a lot of good siege forces. Like I said, right, they brought in Chinese engineers. That was their specialty.
Mm.
So they're able to kind of do that. Like when they have a lot of tough sieges, especially in mountains of Iran, because those are really difficult places to
Mm.
besiege, right? The Ismailis are able to get up quite high into these kind of places, and in some cases they just can hold out until they run out of food. But the Mongols have
Mm.
a fairly good force. As I said, like they're bringing in quite a variety of peoples, besides their own like particular their own forces. But they're quite good. Like there was one. It was for a long time. It was thought that somehow the Mongols brought in gunpowder weapons with them for the siege of Baghdad, but that's kind of been kind of debunked.
Mm. So what kind of siege craft did they have? Did they have trebuchets, catapults, or did they have a but aware of European technology at this point of siege craft, or what did they have their own Asian variant, to put it that way?
They probably had yeah, they had definitely had like catapults and kind of those kind of particular siege weapons that you kind of associate with Western Europe. There was probably a kind of other kind of interesting materials. They may have had like kind of primitive rockets that they used, but not at Baghdad. But like yeah, by when they come up to Baghdad, they're able to launch a fairly effective siege. Tossing boulders, even the palm trees they're ripping out of the ground to toss them against the walls of Baghdad. So yeah, like it was a very methodical siege. So it was quite good.
let's talk about the Mongol before we go into the siege itself. Let's talk about the Mongol army for a bit. What was that? How you have a number? We rather talk about how they talk about the Abbasid army as well, of course. But what before first I want to begin with the Mongol army. So what how huge numbers are we talking about here? What kind you mentioned cavalry and
Yeah.
what other types of army
So
units did you have?
Hulagu's force, yeah, Hulagu's force again is said to be like 2 out of every 10 Mongol soldiers. It's hard to give a number on that, but we're probably looking at a couple 100,000 men overall. And this is a force. It moves incredibly slowly across Asia to get to, and that's in part because this is families coming with them, herds of sheep that need to be grazed, as well as horses. So it's a very slow moving force that like eventually gets to the Middle East by about 2 or 2.5 years, which is quite a long time. But and they're being supplemented by kind of various Iranian forces, people from Afghanistan that are coming in. They It's said like there's 1,000 kind of Chinese engineers that are brought in. We have an account. One of the accounts of the siege of Baghdad comes from the kind of Chinese commander of these forces. So they're kind of bringing this in, and they're kind of slowly moving along. Hulagu is kind of feasting as he goes along, accepting kind of tributes from the various peoples. But they're able, their first mission was to defeat the Ismailis, and they do that, fairly well. Like the Ismailis had strongholds in like the mountains of northern Iran. They're able to kind of, defeat them one by one, capture the Ismaili ruler. He's executed, and that kind of leaves them in control of Iran, and basically near the doorstep of Baghdad by 1258.
Hmm. And let's talk about the Abbasid army. What was compared to the Mongol army, because it's quite huge, as you kind of stated. So what was the Abbasid army like? We talked briefly about this, but how did it
Uh,
gather force to counterattack the Mongols?
well, they would just hire people. There was plenty of people to hire for kind of forces, and there might be some local forces, but like the kind of typical thing in the Middle East is to hire troops that have that kind of professional backing. They're there was one criticism of the caliph was that he wound up dismissing about 20,000 men in 1258 because he didn't think there was going to be an attack, and then because he didn't
That's
want to
fake
pay,
news.
he didn't want to pay them. So and then he has to, at the end, he has to repay him to bring him back in. But yeah, like it's often like a very big mix of a few local kind of standing army, and whoever you can kind of hire that's kind of around the so but their force would much smaller. Maybe we're looking at like 40,000 men at their peak that would be able to defend Baghdad.
What about the defense system of Baghdad? What would that look like at the time?
Like this, you have to kind of think of Baghdad like the idea of the round city is long gone. There is cities over across both sides of the Tigris River, and it's only that
Are we
west,
talking
the
about the
eastern side.
1258? Yeah.
Yeah,
It-
1258.
yeah.
Like so like on the eastern side there is like a walled area with fairly good walls, kind of the city, but like there are a lot of suburbs that have no walls at all, and you kind of think of Baghdad as a collection of different neighborhoods, right? So part of them, the main one is well defended, has gates, walls, everything you want. You're also defended by, have the river as well that can be a good defense or not, and then there are other areas that just have no real defenses at all. So those are the ones that go quickly.
So did they have fortresses nearby? Did they have war? and that kind
No,
of
no,
defense.
no, they would. No, they wouldn't. Like, I have to you have to kind of think of like the kind of Middle East. It wouldn't have like castles, like that are dotting the landscape, things like that. There would be some fortresses here and there, basically a lot of it, was to keep the cities itself would be, have some good defenses. Like Aleppo, Damascus were really known to have really strong defenses at this time. But like Baghdad, we don't really know too much about it, but it doesn't seem like they had anything particularly defensive. This is, you have to remember, this is a place that hasn't really experienced war in generations, like a real invasion, real fighting. So it's not like there's any kind of defensive, big defensive areas to maintain.
So let's see what is the reaction when the Mongols arrive outside this, and they see this huge army arriving outside Baghdad.
Yeah, for like the months preceding up, like Hulagu was kind of told that the best case solution was to have the caliph submit to him, right? Peacefully take it over, just rule on it. But if he couldn't do that, he was expected to take over and defeat it militarily. So he does try for quite a while to give the caliphs offers and have them bring in submission. They're always kind of rejected, like and it's eventually, it takes a while for like all the kind of troops to get it put in place. By November of 1257, they begin the campaign, launching various attacks, various armies that head into what kind of is Iraq and converge on Baghdad. So, the Mongols are coming mostly from the east, although they're coming in like three different major forces, but they're also coming in from the north. Or if you remember that guy named Beju, he was back in like near Azerbaijan at this time. He sends his armies. He brings with him like the Armenians, the Georgians, and maybe even a few Crusaders from Antioch. That would be a really interesting
Where they're
move
like,
too.
yay, let's fight the infidels and see them perish. Where was that the reason they joined
Yeah,
the Mongols?
well, no, they joined because they had to, but they were like the Armenian and Georgian chroniclers. They have a very good spin on it. They often say like that. Oh, we led the forces. We were the first ones to attack Baghdad, and that's the honest truth about it is that's because they were told by the Mongols to be, you guys going first. So because they're like cannon fodder, really,
Yeah.
but yeah, they're one of quite a collection. And there's a fun like so there's people like the ruler of Mosul. He's this emir, and he's kind of like watching these things, and he has both allegiance to the Caliphate and to the Mongols. And there's a point where he gets two requests on the eve of war, and the Mongols ask for siege equipment, but while the caliph asks for more musicians. And he says to his followers, "Oh man, just look at this, and just look at these two requests, and we know how the war is going to go." And just I feel bad for Baghdad. So, and he was right. So, yeah. So like he's also kind of sides up with the Mongols mostly. He doesn't go to Baghdad until after the siege, but he does
He flees, the
help them out
caliph
with.
flees the city.
The caliph, so the caliph is in Baghdad. He sees these armies kind of converging on them, and like it was really interesting how the Mongols conducted this campaign by having multiple fronts that come after them, and basically they're kind of trying to push all the people like to be refugees into Baghdad. And I've often, I was really intrigued by this aspect because the Mongols seem to have this military strategy that they took from their great hunts. So it's been recorded with kind of various observers of the Mongols that the Khans would set up these giant hunts where tens of thousands of men would be sent to kind of corral animals, across the steppe, and they would go hundreds of miles in different directions to corral and bring them all into a relatively small area of just maybe a few square kilometers. And if you can think of, like, they're just trying to push herds of elk or kind of animals like that, so they can be hunted down by the Mongols at their pleasure at this little one spot. So it's a wonderful idea of how they can coordinate strategy, but they're able to kind of send forces from various directions, pushing many refugees into Baghdad itself. The Caliph responds by sending out a force of about 20,000 men to go attack one of these kind of columns of Mongol forces. They head out northwest. They initially defeat this small, like, Mongol force, and they think they've won a big victory, and they continue the pursuit, only to wind up in this trap where the Mongols have kind of lured them into an area where they can overflood the dikes, break dikes, and cause flooding. And they basically annihilate this 20,000 man army of the Abbasids, and take that out before they even get to the city. So,
but something you mentioned earlier that's kind of fascinated me a bit was that you said that it was on the both sides, right? The walls, there was areas where there was a wall, and there was areas where there wasn't a wall. So did the Mongols use this as an advantage and try to enter the city where there wasn't any walls, or did it just try to?
Oh yeah, like all the other cities, like when they get to Basra, when they get to Hilla, they immediately the city is immediately surrendered to them, as they should have, for their own sake. So, like, yeah, like an unwalled city, they would, like, send, like, a person, say, hey, you're gonna surrender, and thank you very much, and they're able to kind of do that quickly, and, like, and people, like, either flee, like, because there's plenty of villages and things like that, and farmers that, like, are scared, and they want to look for protection, so they're all starting to head to Baghdad. But, like, other places, they surrender quite quickly. They know what's good for them.
I mean, with the, like you said, I was referring to Baghdad right now, where you said it wasn't a round city it used to be. So how easy was it for the Mongols to enter the city when it? I mean, it must have grown quite a lot, right? It from the
Yeah.
it was founded.
Yeah, like, by say mid-January of 1258, Mongol forces start arriving. They first get to the western suburbs, which are on the other side of the Tigris, and they immediately just capitulate that area. Like, that area is not fought over. So they're able to basically go to one side of can take over to one side of the Tigris River. The walled area, they basically start moving their kind of troops and surround this the remaining walled city, with their own ditch and siege works. So they kind of spend a few days. So, like, the siege actually doesn't start until January 29th. So it takes like basically a couple weeks to kind of prepare the kind of fighting ground, and it's on January 29th that they begin to send, like, the catapults and start attacking the walls. So
Let's talk about the siege itself then. How long time does it last, and how
not
is it? What is the siege
not
like?
long. The siege is basically the Mongol forces are kind of surrounding the city. They have catapults, trebuchet type machines, firing to take out, and their aim was to take out particular gates that were always the kind of the weak point of any kind of, like, world force, was always to take out a gate. And by February 5th, they are able to break down one of the main gates to the city and take control of it. So the Caliph at this point tries to make a dash by river with ships, but meanwhile there's a Mongol force that is kind of set up along the riverbanks. They have their own ships as well. They're able to force the Caliph to return back to Baghdad and wipe out that kind of escape opportunity. And so by February 5th, the Mongols, are able to kind of capture like one of the main gates, and from there take control of the walls very quickly. But they don't enter the city at this point. They kind of take over, and then negotiations begin for the surrender, and that's always a fun part too.
So how does that go, the surrendering and entering the city?
Yeah, so the Mongols, start. Basically, these have so-called negotiations with various kind of forces. Like the Caliph is at this point trying to figure out a way to survive, and he sends out
You mean the Abbasids, not the Mongols?
Yeah, the Abbasids
Yeah.
are trying to survive. They send out various officials, and the Mongols at first are sometimes like, "Oh, we accept your surrender, but like but as part of your surrender, I want you to bring out all these men." Once a large part of the Abbasid army is marched out of the city, the Mongols take them a little far away, and then they execute them all. So they wait. So you have like these people where like all these officials wind up, leading more men out. They die. Then the officials get killed themselves, and finally, the Abbasid Caliph on the 10th. So he himself walks out and surrenders the city, surrenders himself to the Mongols. And after that, then is the Mongols have to decide what they're going to do with the city.
Because as we mentioned before, the House of Wisdom, which is actually kind of an important part of this siege, because when they entered the city, and I read Lost Islamic History this summer, which was really good, and he talked about in the book how the Mongol conquest of Baghdad, how they throw, how the House of Wisdom basically is set on fire basically at the time of the Mongol entering Baghdad. So let's talk about how the House of Wisdom is treated here.
Yeah, like I said, like it wouldn't be said like there's at this time a physical House of Wisdom, but there are quite a lot of scholars and people that are wealthy that live there. There's a really good account, and if you're going to give me a moment, I'll kind of, there's a person that we have an account of the actual what happens to him and his neighborhood when Baghdad falls. His name was Saif al-Din Urmawi, and he's this musician. He's like a court musician. He's a bit of he's something of a scholar. He's kind of studies the science of music. So he's really, he's really well off. He seems to be living in a really nice neighborhood of Baghdad. We don't know exactly where, but so as he recounts it, basically when Baghdad is surrendered, Hulagu has various city officials come to meet with them, and they decide to divvy up the city for looting with all his forces, right, with the various kind of commanders. So you have so Saif al-Din in his recounts, he says like at my neighborhood, Beju Noyen comes up, and he comes up with like forces. Basically, he says come up with like naphtha throwers and carpenters, and they come up to the gates of his neighborhood and say, if you open this and let us in, we'll let you live. If you don't, we're going to come in and kill you all. And so Saif al-Din wisely, with like kind of his other neighbors help, comes out, surrenders, and you have this big show of it. And then he really has to kind of figure out what to do. So he brings Beju Noyen into his house, and immediately starts serving him food, drink, and bringing him all this gold and precious stuff, and he's telling his neighbors, I want you to bring in all your wealthiest things. Like, if you want to live, we're going to treat this person really well. He immediately tells him that you can, Beiju, you can stay here, have your other forces go and take out other neighborhoods. If you kind of, we'll just be this kind of base for you, which is pretty kind of throwing the other people under the bus. But I can see where he's kind of coming from. He's really scared, by the way. He thinks he's going to die. But yeah, like for the next 3 days, then basically they were kind of all told that like certain parts of the city would get taken for 2 days, some for 3, some for 1. Others would be protected. There were a lot of areas that were actually, protected because they had surrendered, or they were merchants, or for various reasons. But
So
in his
what happens
neighborhood,
to the
they're
chain
brought in.
on his surrender? What did they
The
kill him,
Kayla,
or
yeah, the Caliph, there are a lot of tales about what happens to him. Like Marco Polo has this kind of famous tale where he's shut up into a tower with all his gold and riches that he wouldn't sell to provide for his army, and he starves to death there. But in reality, the Mongols just, after a while, after his kind of use to them is come to an end, and this within a couple of weeks, he's just taken out to the countryside, to like a little town, just executed, just out of the way. And his family, most of his family were executed as well. So but the Mongols kind of get rid of them, and there are, they can be fairly, ferocious, and when it comes to like these executions. But there's nothing in particular about his that we know of. He's just taken out to somewhere and killed. So but Urmawi is, meanwhile, like, he has to deal with all these things where Beiju is in his house. He's getting this constant stream of precious gold, minerals like carpets, books, and things like that. And Urmawi is pretty clever at this, because he's trying to treat these people really well, and he's telling, oh, this is this wonderful thing, this carpet, this silk. There's this terrible story where he brings in 10 singing women for Beiju to watch, right, during this. And this is, I think, on day 1. Beiju is watching this, and he sadly he just takes a liking to one of the women and rapes her in front of the entire crowd. And so he has to come back the next day. Urmawi is telling his neighbors, you have to bring in even more stuff for tomorrow. And this is the way that they're not getting looted. They're building, their house is not going to get torn up apart. They're not going to get killed. Urmawi, being this musician, he eventually, as he's talking to Beiju tells him, I want you to go meet Hulagu. So of course, he can't say no. So he comes into Hulagu's presence, and there's a little more talk back and forth, and he kind of says, yeah, like, what kind of great songs do you know? And Urmawi says, yeah, I know a song that can put a man to sleep. And Hulagu is like, wow, you're gonna sing that? Have that song sing for me. And Urmawi's, in his little records is saying, like, and I thought I was gonna die, because how are they gonna put this guy to sleep? But he has this singer. She has really good plays the lute. She's the one kind of sings. He makes sure he drinks 3 cups of wine, and sure enough, Hulagu falls asleep for a few moments, and Urmawi is relieved, and he actually gets his area spared for the rest of the kind of siege, or the rest of the looting, which kind of takes about a week to do. So the Mongols wind up kind of taking quite a lot of stuff. They're not necessarily interested in books, but there's the one thing that you hear, all these books get destroyed. That's probably not true, but they are eventually bought up by Mongol officials. There is a guy named Nasir al-Tusi who was with the Ismailis when the Mongols came, switched sides, and became kind of like the leading astronomer slash astrologer slash scientific advisor to Hulagu. And he's able to buy up tens of thousands of volumes of books, which he actually sends to a place called Moraga. And there he sets up the observatory of Moraga for astronomy. And this becomes the leading center in the world for scientific research for about like 50 years.
So let's talk about Baghdad. What happens to Baghdad after the conquest, after the Mongol victory? What's the state of Baghdad for the next decade or century?
Yeah, like the reports that you read on chronicles, they tend to get exaggerated fairly quickly. So like the first kind of report says about 80,000 people died during this siege, which is a terrible number, but not catastrophic. And but then about 20 years later, you're getting reports that there was 200,000. 50 years later, it was 800,000. Then like by the 16th century, we're saying like 2 million people died, or everyone died. But that wasn't the case. It certainly suffered quite a lot of losses. But the Mongols, within about a month or so, decide to leave. They leave behind a force to help clean up the city. It's put in charge with various kind of Arabic officials, kind of in the lead. And Baghdad kind of goes back to being Baghdad. It is certainly one of the largest cities in the Mongol realm that kind of forms in the Middle East, and it's called the Ilkhanate. But it's not the capital. That's actually Tabriz, which is like northern Iran, is the capital. But Baghdad continues on. There's quite a lot of kind of interesting stuff that happens, over the next few decades, like city politics and stuff like that. But like, there's a sense that like 14th century writers tend to visit and say, man, like parts of the cities are ruined. It's terrible. But that's kind of the life of medieval cities in a way. Especially in the Middle East, where parts can kind of fall into ruin, people just build elsewhere. But yeah, it kind of continues on, but it's certainly lost a lot of its grandeur, and certainly it's a shock to the people of the Middle East that this city has fallen so quickly. After so long kind of being the center of the Islamic world, that Baghdad is no longer that's center. And there's a lot of kind of poetry and stories, just people being really really shocked and really sad that this has happened. But Baghdad goes on.
Well, was this through the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate?
Yeah, the Abbasid, so a couple, we have the Mongols try and kill like everybody that's kind of could be an heir or a relative of the Mongols of the Abbasids. But a couple of people do make it out. At least there's actually two people that are able to kind of flee westwards. One of them gets to Cairo, where the Mamluks set him up as the new Abbasid Caliph. They give him an army to go retake Baghdad, and this happens around 1260, 1261. He is defeated and killed in battle, and meanwhile the Mamluks in Cairo find another Abbasid heir, and he's like the third cousin of the fourth uncle of the Caliph, right? Of the original the Caliph of Al-Matusim. And they install him as Caliph, as the Caliph in Cairo as Mamluk, but he has no power. He's literally put into a palace, and he cannot leave that palace. And he's a figurehead, and that remains all the way up until the 16th century, when the Mamluk dynasty finally falls to the Ottomans. It's only then that the Abbasid line is completely annulled. So, but yeah, it's kind of a sad end. Like, you literally have caliphs. You are born as a caliph, and all you do is minor religious functions, and you cannot have any political power at all. So, very much a figurehead for the next 300 years.
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been Mongol Conquest of Baghdad. Before we go, do you have anything you want to promote, and in social media where people might find you, and the links you want me to put in the description below?
Oh, hey, I love if people can, visit our website, medievalists.net. We have a lot of things kind of going. We only recently started just doing online courses, so check for that. I know we're kind of teaming up with like scholars around the world, really, to kind of teach this and that. Maybe we'll get like a Mongol course one day, I hope. But yeah, check out our website. We have really good writers. We have a great writer named Jack Wilson. He's a graduate student up at Central European University. His theme is the Mongols. I'm really impressed by his work. You can visit us, like, we're on all the social medias, Facebook, Twitter. I even have TikTok. And yeah, if you like the Middle Ages, check us out. See if there's ways you can support us, and always love to hear back.
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been That Age 12. We are available on Instagram under That Age 12. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you can find podcasts these days. If you are on Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving us a review. That would help us out a lot. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.